Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. I'm a CSI agent and I'd like to talk about one of my cases. For those who don't know, CSI stands for Crime Scene Investigation. Our agents are usually the second to arrive on the scene, immediately after the police or sheriffs have completed their initial investigation. It's our turn to start collecting evidence to help as much as possible. We try to prove innocence or guilt based on the evidence. My name is Jim Lee and I usually work with Bobby. Her real name is Roberta, but she prefers to be called Bobby by her colleagues. She is a very attractive woman, but when it comes to work, she is completely focused on business. We were in the office when the call came. 2 people were shot to death in a motel room. The suspect was found at the crime scene with a gun in his hands. Bobby and I headed to the motel. It looked like this was going to be one of the easy ones. It's not every day that a suspect is standing there holding a murder weapon when the police arrive. When we arrived, we spoke to the lead officer. He told us that they had received a call about a shooting. When they arrived, they entered the room. The door was unlocked and ajar. There was a white woman lying on the bed with a black man on top of her. The officer also told us that the suspected shooter was standing there with a gun in his hand, and dropped it when they entered the room. He looked at the officers and said he didn't do it. He didn't say anything else. He was shocked and confused. Of course, they did the standard handcuff procedure and read him his rights. He refused to talk. While we were talking, another officer led the suspect out of the room in handcuffs. I looked up and saw that it was my friend Mark. He saw me and said, "Jim, I didn't do it. I didn't do it." My stomach dropped. We went to high school together. The last time I saw Mark, he was saying that he seemed headed for divorce if he didn't kill her first. Now, he won't have to worry about divorce. The picture was not in his favor. Maybe he was going crazy and had an attack of amnesia. I don't know, but I hope the evidence will tell us the truth. He's at a crime scene, gun in hand, his wife in bed with another man. God, how could he deny all this? Perhaps he was counting on an insanity defense. Bobby and I began our task of gathering information. We finished collecting evidence and went outside to inspect the place. We followed procedure and looked for witnesses, tire tracks, and anything else that could help us. While we were inside, we found a camera on the floor by the bed and took it with us. Mark's car was towed to our garage. We called the prison and said that we wanted to check all of Mark's belongings for signs of gunshots. 3 shots at point-blank range should have left marks. I got a call from the lead officer who said Mark kept saying he didn't do it, and that I was the only one he wanted to tell his story to. Damn, I didn't want to get involved in his story. All the evidence pointed to Mark, my old friend. What the hell was I supposed to do? I agreed to listen to his story. I did tell him that all his statements would be recorded. I still have a responsibility to do my job right. I also told him that I always go by the evidence, and right now the evidence is not in his favor, but I will remain neutral until all the evidence is taken into account. I also warned him that if the case went to trial, I would have to testify about the evidence. This would include everything he tells me now. I asked him if he still wanted me to listen. He replied, "Yes, Jim, I trust you to make the right decision," and began to tell his story. I turned on the recorder and sat back in my chair listening. I didn't know what to do. I had caught Susan cheating on me over and over again, and now I was trying to figure out how to respond. We hadn't gotten along for a long time. We were married for 5 years before problems started. We have 2 children, Mark J. and Kayla. As you know, Jim, Susan and I got married right after high school. I started working in one of the local factories and she got a job with her father in the insurance company. Her father is rich but not crazy rich. He is famous in our area and has great influence. He didn't like Susan dating me in school because I was a popular jock, but of course he told everyone I was dating his daughter. As luck would have it, I broke my leg in the last football game of my senior year. Chances for a scholarship were gone. I wasn't smart enough for an academic scholarship, so college was out. My parents wanted to try to pay for my education, but I told them not to spend the money. I didn't even know what I wanted. After finishing school and my leg healing, my father got me a job in a factory. The work was hard but well paid. I have tried my best since my father got me into this position. He just died last year and I miss him very much. He was too kind and died too young. Of course, after Susan's father found out that I wouldn't continue my education, he told Susan that he didn't want her to date me. But then she got pregnant and he was furious, but there was little he could do. Susan and I got married before she started to noticeably show. Her father wanted her to wear a white dress, of course. When the child was born, everyone understood that the baby was born 3 months early. We were happy, got a small place to live and settled down. Of course, Susan's father and I never got along. I wasn't good enough for his precious little girl. We moved on and life seemed good. We had arguments like all couples, but her parents always intervened. She said she wanted to work and not stay home with the children. She began working for her father as a secretary in his agency. My mom looked after the children. Susan hadn't even been working for 3 months when our personal life began to decline sharply. She was always too tired or not feeling well. One morning she was getting dressed and put on a short skirt. She wasn't wearing underwear. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. She didn't look worried at all. "No, I stopped wearing them 6 months ago. For some reason I kept getting an infection about every 3 months, and when I went to the doctor, she told me to go without panties. What about these periods of women's days? Of course then I have to wear them and it's only for a week. What do you think I'm doing showing my 5th place to the world? Most women I know don't wear panties unless they have to." I didn't know what to think. I don't check every woman's but for panty lines, but I knew I would do this from now on. I was talking to a couple of women I was friends with and asked them if they wore panties. They laughed at me until I told them I was serious. "Well, Mark, to be honest, I wear them and I don't. When I wear shorts or pants, I usually don't wear them. If I'm wearing a skirt or dress, yes, I definitely am. I know guys are going to try and look up my skirt, and I don't always seem to sit like a lady," Carol said. Carol was probably my best friend. If I weren't married, I know I would want to date her. She was always nice and friendly. She was one of the few women I could talk to about my problems. "Thank you, Carol. I appreciate your honesty. And yes, I'm trying to look up your skirt too. You're wearing blue panties today," I laughed. "Guys do it. I don't know anyone who doesn't. Maybe not all guys are pigs, but a girl in a short skirt or dress always attracts their attention." So what about Susan? I wondered if she told me the whole truth. I constantly read stories about cheating wives. I think working women are at greater risk of having an affair. Sure, stay-at-home moms may cheat, but working women are tempted every day. It would seem that they need to become stronger in their marriage to withstand the onslaught of persecution. If women also went without panties and men noticed, wouldn't they be harassed more often? So I thought, if you take a young pretty woman like Susan in a not-so-great marriage, and she's out there all day with men staring at her pantyless 5th place, our marriage will be in deep trouble. I needed to do something to try and get her back. When she got home from work, I told her that my mom would watch the kids and we could go out to dinner. She grumbled something but agreed to go. It didn't go very well. All she talked about was herself, her new friends at work, and how much fun they were. This got me thinking. This is where I worked hard my whole life and could never call the work or the people there fun. Why is her place of work so different? She didn't wear panties to dinner either. As we sat down at the table, I tried to follow her eyes and noticed that she was looking around a lot. Behind me there were men sitting in booths and I think they were having quite a show. I realized then that we probably wouldn't be able to save our marriage. I knew deep down that she had been cheating on me for quite some time. I decided not to talk to her about it anymore. I lost respect for her. Some things you just know, and all I need now is proof. I felt very sorry for our children. I spent more time with them and the 3 of us were always doing something together. They always ran up to Mom when she came home and told her about their day. She always told them the same lies. God, I wish I could be there, but Mommy has to work. I wanted to hit her so hard, but I had to think about the children. It would be bad to have their father was in prison, but now I'm here for something I didn't do. Crap. I kept a close eye on her for the next few weeks. Every time she called and said she would be working late, I asked my mom to babysit and kept an eye on her. She always dated men from the office. I started taking my camera with me and taking pictures of her with her friends. They would always go into motels and I would take pictures of them as they entered. I never filmed more intimate things, just them entering the motel. I'm sure they didn't clean there. I knew the marriage was over after the first time I saw her with another man entering the motel. I began planning a divorce. I no longer approached her intimacy. Seeing her made me feel sick. Every time I looked at her, I imagined her in bed with someone else, and this always disgusted me. I once told Susan that if I ever caught her cheating, I would kill both her and the son of a bitch she was with. She just shouted back that she was not afraid of me. She said that marrying me was the biggest mistake of her life. She told me what a bad lover I was. I asked her, "How do you know if you haven't slept with someone other than me? We were both each other's first when we met. So, you really are hanging out now?" She was worried and tried to think of what to say. She finally blurted out some lame excuse about reading it in some damn magazine, and how her friends were telling her how good their intimate lives were. Well, screw you and your magazine. If I find out you cheated on me, you're dead. Tell your girlfriends the truth. You'll have to sleep with me from time to compare me. I know this makes me look bad in the eyes of others. First, I threatened her and then she appeared dead. No, to be honest, I didn't do that. Susan told me last week, "Mark, I haven't cheated on you, but I want out of this marriage. You're crazy and I don't love you anymore. Just take your things and leave." I will say, and my dad will hire us a lawyer, and we will settle our irreconcilable differences. You can take your things and leave. Just don't interfere in my life. I asked her, "What about the children?" "You won't take my children. I don't care who your parents are. They do nothing for our children. I want custody and my mom loves them and she will help me take care of them. Besides, when you go out with your boyfriends, who is going to look after them?" I asked. I remember how that day she turned her back on me and left. I know she loved the children, but to what extent? She didn't want to give up her new night life for them. If I had proof, I knew I could get custody. I allowed her to go to hotels with several men from the office. I wanted her to commit adultery. My lawyer told me that this would be the evidence I needed to take my children back. No court would award her children or alimony with such evidence. Yesterday when I came home, I heard her talking on the phone to her boyfriend. She didn't know I was there, so I just listened. She mentioned the time in the motel. So I left the house and came back through the front door, making noise so she could hear me. When I walked in, she quickly hung up. I asked her who she was talking to and she said her mother. I already knew it was a lie. I decided that I would follow her, go to the motel, break into the room and take the photos I needed. I would take them to my lawyer and file for divorce. After Susan left the house dressed like a woman of easy virtue, I took our 2 small children to their mother, and asked her to leave them for the night. After I burst into the motel room, I thought there would be a fight, and one of us wouldn't be coming home tonight, so I asked my mother to keep the children out of danger. It took a while to get the kids ready and pack their overnight bag. I took my camera and off we went. I left the kids with my mom and got to the motel about half an hour later. I didn't have a good plan. I'm not a weakling, so I figured I could handle any fight. I wasn't really thinking clearly, now it's obvious. I found the motel in their room. It was a corner room. I was sitting in the car holding my camera when I heard 3 shots. I looked up and saw someone quickly leave the room. I got out of the car with the camera and headed toward the room. There was no sound coming from inside, so I slowly turned the doorknob. It opened. I pushed the door and saw that they were dead. I looked down and saw a gun. I don't know why, but I picked it up. I was in a trance. I don't know how long I stood there, but the policeman told me to drop the gun and lie face down on the floor with my hands behind my head. I dropped the gun as well as the camera and lay face down. Finally, I managed to choke out. I didn't do it.
Then they took me outside, and that's when I saw you. Jim, please help me. That was the side of the story. Plausible? I did not know. I told him. We'll look at the evidence and see what happens. I asked him about the person he saw leaving the room. He said it all happened too fast. He didn't see anything except the figure, who quickly ran away from the building. He didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. The person was dressed in dark clothes. While he was in jail, I took a test to see if he had fired a gun recently. The results were negative, but he showered after being placed in the cell. The remains of gunpowder, if there were any, could be washed away. When I returned to our laboratory, Bobby asked how it went. "Do you believe him, Jim?" she asked. "Bobby, I'm going by the evidence. It doesn't lie. I hope he told me the truth for his sake and his children's sake, but the evidence has to tell us more. So far, it's not in his favor. According to photographs and the police report, he was not near the victims. Whoever shot them did it from the end of the bed." I told Bobby that it looked like the camera belonged to Mark. He said he was going to take a photo to prove her infidelity. She has already sent them to the laboratory for development. We'll probably have photos tomorrow. We also need to find out whose gun it was. As Bobby and I talked, we agreed that the suspect, Mark or someone else, must have known the time and place of the meeting. Bobby also said that there were no traces of gunpowder on Mark's clothing. She added that he probably soiled himself when he saw what was happening. Maybe there's something here. Perhaps Mark really was telling the truth. The next day was complete chaos. The prosecutor was already putting pressure on us. He received a call from Susan's father, saying he wanted Mark to be sentenced to death. We tried to explain to the prosecutor that we still had a lot of evidence to study. He was caught in a room with a murder weapon in his hands. "What more do you need?" asked the prosecutor. His name was Brett. "Brett, we have a few unanswered questions." "Nothing major but still unanswered, and a good lawyer could take advantage of this in court if we don't find answers," I said. "Which, for example?" Brett asked. "The finger test does not indicate that he recently fired a gun. There was no powder residue on his shirt. His fingerprints on the gun lay on top of another set of prints that we were unable to identify. The timeline is poor. Who led him into the room? He walks into the room, soils himself, takes the gun, and shoots the victims while holding the camera in his other hand. He stands there for what we assume is 7 minutes, holding the gun until the police arrive. Reasonable doubt, Brett. His lawyer just needs reasonable doubt. Give us a few more days and we'll see what we can find." "Damn, I thought this would be a no-brainer," exclaimed Brett. Bobby looked at me. "You know, after everything you said to Brett, I don't think Mark did it," Bobby replied. "If he didn't do it, I wonder who did. We need to see what's on the camera. We also need a list of other people who stayed at the motel the last 2 nights. There may have been witnesses. By the way, do we have any information about the male victim?" I asked Bobby. His name was Tony Williams. He was in his early 40s, married, and worked for the insurance company. Bobby answered. Since temporary custody of the children was granted to Mark's mother, she was allowed to keep them until the end of this case. Susan's parents really didn't want anything to do with them. The next day, Bobby brought all the photos. Mark had a digital camera with over 100 pictures. There were at least 20 different men in them. At first, we thought that perhaps she was a woman of easy virtue. Eventually, we realized that she just liked having an intimate moment with different men. All the photos were of different men. It's surprising that Mark didn't lose his temper. He later told us that he thought about the children to keep his sanity. We went to the insurance company where Susan worked. Many of the men in the photographs worked there. Mary Brandt met us. She was a receptionist in her 40s, dressed too provocatively for an insurance office, but very attractive for her age. She called Mr. Davis, Susan's father, who tried to tell us that we were wasting our time. "We already have a killer and we need to go after him," he said. We asked Mr. Davis to speak with us privately. He led us into his office and we sat down. "What the hell is going on?" asked Mr. Davis. "Sir, there is a small chance that Mark might not be the killer. We need to close a few doors before pressing charges. We have photographs of your daughter with other men. Unfortunately, we need to talk to them, and many of them work here," I answered. "You have your damn killer," he shouted at me. I pulled out some photos of his daughter with several men from the agency entering hotel rooms. "Now, Mr. Davis, I didn't want to bring this up, but we have more pictures of your daughter with other men. I can't believe this happened in front of my eyes. My own daughter. These idiots will pay. Mr. Davis, we need to talk to these men. What you do after this is none of our business, but we need to talk to everyone. Mr. Davis called his secretary, and she led us into a room where, one after another, 12 different men from the agency entered. They all said pretty much the same thing. Most of them were married or divorced. None were single. It makes you wonder how many divorces could happen, because of one woman with an intimate addiction. Why are so many men so weak? Besides, she was the boss's daughter, that in itself made her desirable. One of the answers was very similar to the others. She always showed herself off. What can you do? Some said. Several men denied having a night with her, until they were shown photographs of themselves entering a motel with her. The couple even said they would not talk without a lawyer present. We explained that we were just checking information, but if they felt they needed a lawyer, we would agree, but it would be known and perhaps raise a red flag. Most of them talked to us after that. One guy, Bill, was in love with Susan. He wanted her to divorce Mark, and he was going to his wife and marry her. He was very angry when he found out that most of the office had relationships with Susan. When he found out that she was going on a date with Tony, he was furious. He loved her, and she was going to have an intimate with a black man. Of course, no one admitted to the shooting. We really thought about Bill. He was almost on the edge. He was definitely on our short list of suspects, including staying with Mark.
Of course, they almost all asked if we were going to tell anyone about their actions with Susan. We just told them that we keep it secret, but their boss knows about the situation. We knew that after we left, the office would be a complete mess. We still hadn't found any evidence to justify Mark. In fact, he had even more reasons for revenge. Our next stop was Tony's house. We needed to talk to the wife of the black male victim. Her name was Tashika Williams, a pretty black woman in her 30s. She came to the door in a nightgown and a silk robe. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Mrs. Williams, we are from the CSI crime team, and we want to ask you a few questions about your husband, Tony. Firstly, we would like to express our condolences. We know that now is a bad time for you, but we must gather any information we can get as early as possible. Can we come in?" She looked a little worried but invited us in. We asked all the basic questions, including of course her whereabouts the night before. "Look," she said, "Tony and I talked about divorce. We didn't get along very well. He started cheating on me and I kicked his 5th place a few days ago. I didn't kill him, and besides, didn't you catch a guy with a gun in his hand?" she asked. "Yes, there is a suspect, but we are not sure that he is the killer. We must check all the evidence." "Where were you last night, Mrs. Williams?" At that moment, a man came out of the corridor. "What's going on, Tashika?" "Who are these people?" asked the man. "They're investigating Tony's murder. They want to know where I was last night," Tashika replied. "Tashika was in bed with me." "Damn it, if it's any of your damn business," the big guy replied. "May I know your name, sir?" I asked. "Angel White, if it's any of your damn business. Tashika and I were here all night. If you want, go and check our damn sheets." "Stupid damn Tony quit the bag for the sake of that fat 5th place Tamer. What a damn fool." "Tamer? Who is Tamer?" I asked. "Tony's new girlfriend, or at least she was." "Wasn't she killed at the same time as Tony?" asked Angel. "Do you have Tamer's address?" "We'd like to talk to her," I answered. "Tamer wasn't with Tony last night." "Sorry, we can't give more information right now," Tashika said. "Be careful when you go to Tamer Damon. Her husband is crazy. I don't know if he found out about Tony and Tamer." Bobby and I left Tashika's house. What a mess. Mark's wife slept with anyone. He could have been accused of killing 2 people. Susan's father did not know that 12 of his agents slept with his daughter. One of the men, Bill, loved his daughter and was willing to divorce his wife in order to marry her. The last person Susan slept with was a married black man whose wife had thrown him out and was already sleeping with another man. Now we found out that Tony had a girlfriend and she was married. It certainly wasn't as simple as the prosecutor had hoped. We stopped at Mark's mom's house on the way back to the office. We had a couple of questions for her. Mrs. Moore, I'm Agent Jim Lee and this is my partner, Agent Bobby Burke. We're investigating Mark's case. Can I talk to you? I asked. Of course, officer. Is my Mark okay? I know he didn't do that terrible thing. He's a good father and was a good husband. He just wanted a good marriage and a happy family. I don't like talking about dead people, but Susan was a bad woman. She had 2 wonderful kids and she never spent time with them. Oh, sorry, officer. I'm starting to talk and I can't stop. All for the sake of my Mark, she replied. Mrs. Moore, do you know if Mark had a gun? I asked. Yes, he had one. His father gave it to him before he died. He keeps it here in my house. Come, I'll show you. She opened the drawer and revealed a 9mm Luger. She said he kept the bullets in another room because of the children. He sometimes took it to the shooting range. He also had 2 guns that were kept locked in the basement if we wanted to see them. Did you know that he was going to run into Susan that day? I asked. Yes, he took his camera to take photos. I told him not to go, but of course he didn't listen to me. He just wanted to get out of this bad marriage and keep his children. There was no way you would have shot Susan and that man, she replied. Thank you, Mrs. Moore. You helped us a lot. The next day we stopped by the prison to see Mark and see if he remembered anything else. He basically didn't remember anything. He said his lawyer came and told him to declare himself insane. He told his lawyer he wouldn't do it because he didn't kill anyone. We checked to see if he had other visitors and his friend Carol came 2 days in a row. Bobby went to Carol and I was called to the morgue. We were right about the shooting and how it probably happened. Then the doctor told me some disturbing news. Blood tests were performed and both victims were positive for a disease. Now we had a completely new situation. I called Mr. Williams and told him to gather all his employees for a short meeting in the afternoon. After he objected, I told him that his daughter and Anthony were both sick, and he might have an epidemic if it is not controlled quickly. He agreed to set up a meeting. I told him not to tell anyone about this. We didn't know where the infection started, but everyone needed to be aware. Bobby returned from her conversation with Carol. She told me she believed Carol was in love with Mark. According to Carol, they were best friends but were never close. She was ready, but Mark said he wanted to wait until after the divorce because he didn't want to cheat just because Susan did it. Bobby also said Carol claimed she was home alone the night of the shooting. This probably adds another possible suspect. We attended an insurance company meeting. There were about 30 employees there. They were all at the meeting. I was the first to speak. I simply told them that when Tony and Susan were autopsied, it was found that they were both sick. The hall became completely silent. This meant that anyone who had a night with one of them could also become infected with the virus. The sanitary inspector took the floor. He explained that anyone who had an intimate with one of them needed to be tested for the virus. Also, their spouses and significant others who had unprotected night with them should be tested. He informed everyone that the results would be confidential. He also told them that even if they had unprotected intimate, it did not automatically mean they had contracted the virus. A representative from the health insurance company said all tests would be covered by their insurance. If someone chose not to get tested at that point, they would not be covered for testing for the next 6 months. They wanted to make sure they stopped any possible epidemic now. He also told everyone they have 2 days to tell their spouses or significant others and sign up for testing. We recorded this meeting on video. We wanted to see people's facial expressions when the disease was mentioned. Horror was on the faces of most of the employees. They all looked rather stunned except for one person. We made copies of photographs of several individuals. I looked at Bobby as she made copies. Several units from across the army are selected to participate and are sent to Germany with all their equipment, where they work alongside their NATO counterparts during the month-long exercise. My name is Fred Sadler. At the time, I was a relatively new captain in the U.S. Army, working in the Operations Division based at Fort Hood, Texas. This business trip came at the worst possible time to be away from home because my wife was pregnant and the baby was due during this trip. I tried to refuse it, but the Army did not agree. Lydia and I had been married for almost 6 years, most of them were good. The bad moments were when I had to go on a business trip and she stayed at home. Lydia and I had not been friends since childhood. We met one day at the DMV when I was registering my car and she was renewing her license. We sat next to each other, waiting for our numbers to be called, and started chatting. One thing led to another and soon we exchanged phone numbers. A week later we had our first date and a month later we spent our first night together. Lydia was not a screeching beauty, but she had classic features that made my heart skip a beat. She could just look at me and my heart would melt. She also had a classic body type that turned heads. I noticed how both men and women stared at her when she walked by. At first I was proud when I saw how they looked at her, but over time I got tired of it. I began to think of them as leeches who only saw her as an intimate object. I realized that this was something I would have to put up with. Lydia, in turn, took everything more simply. "Let them watch, dear," she said. "It doesn't matter. As they say, you can look, but it's better not to touch." Yes, it's better not to touch them. I thought every time she said this. She tried very hard to keep her body in a shape she liked. I helped her. We spent 3 evenings a week at the gym, running in the park and hiking. We even watched our diet. I don't even remember the last time I had meat for dinner. Watching her get dressed, or better yet undressed, has always fascinated me. When the deployment began, I heard from my commanding officer. "I personally guaranteed that I will do everything possible to get you home before the baby is born," and he kept his word. He arranged for me to take my first flight back to the States after the training ended. I packed my things and was on my way to the plane. I called Lydia, who said she might be going to the hospital in the next couple of days. Then the timing must be perfect because I'm already on my way home. I told her. We ended the conversation with the words, "I love you." It was evening, and I was on my way to the airport when a deer ran into the road in front of us. My driver swerved to avoid it, and the next thing I knew I was waking up in a military hospital in Frankfurt. I had a broken right arm, a broken right leg, 3 ribs on the right side, and a compressed lung on the right side. I was so pilled that I didn't know who I was or where I was. When I began to come to my senses, I started asking questions. "How long have I been here?" I asked the nurse. "5 days," she replied. "Is my wife here?" "No, sir." "Where is she?" "She wasn't here, sir, but your commander notified her immediately after you arrived, so she knows what happened." "Where is my phone?" "She found it among your personal belongings." I called Lydia. "Are you okay?" were her first words. "It doesn't matter how I am." "How are you and the baby?" I asked. She began to cry. "We lost the child, Fred. I am so sorry." I was too stunned to speak. Finally I asked, "Are you okay?" "I think so. I'm home, but they don't want me to travel, otherwise I'd be with you." "What's happened?" I asked. "Nobody knows for sure. Everything seemed fine until I heard one of the nurses say, 'Oops,' and everyone around me started to get nervous. I didn't really understand, but they tried to explain that it had something to do with the umbilical cord." "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked. There was a long pause as we both struggled with our thoughts and emotions. "Physically I'm fine, but emotionally I'm a wreck." "Where are you coming home?" "I don't know, they haven't told me anything yet." "Do you want me to try to come?" No, stay there and take care of yourself." 2 weeks later I was flown home on a medical plane. Lydia met me and accompanied me to the Fort Hood Hospital. She was still an emotional wreck, but our reunion seemed to help us both. I asked her if she had given the child a name. "I named her Nada," she said. At that point we both started crying. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks before I was released on limited duty. Limited service usually meant you didn't have to go into the field and train. This was a relief as my arm and leg were still in casts. A couple of weeks later they were removed. As time went on, things went smoothly in both our marriage and my career. 2 years after we lost our baby, we were transferred to Heidelberg, Germany. We spent 3 years there and traveled all over Europe. During this time I received a promotion to major. When our 3 years were up we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. As a major, we were given quarters for field-level officers. They were much nicer than company officers' apartments and had garages rather than just carports. When we moved into the apartments in Fort Lewis, all our luggage from Germany was sent back. We were in the process of unpacking these boxes, plus the ones we had been storing and hadn't taken with us. Boxes were stacked in every room. Lydia went to the officers' club for a newcomers meeting where she could meet other wives and start making new acquaintances. While she was at the club, I stayed in our apartment unpacking and organizing things. I used a box cutter to open one of the many boxes and started taking things out. This was the box we had kept while we were in Germany. About halfway down, I found a small wooden box that I didn't remember seeing before. I placed it on a stack of boxes and opened it. My life changed forever. Inside was a small stack of envelopes tied with a pink ribbon. I removed the tape and took the top envelope. It wasn't sealed, so I opened it. Inside was an official document with the title birth certificate at the top. As I looked at the document, my mind began to fog. It stated that a girl was born weighing 3 kilograms 400 g and was 48 centimeters tall. The date was the same date Lydia had told me our child had died. The child's name was listed as NAA. It was further stated that the mother's name was Lydia Jane Sadler N. Johnston. Where it required the father's name, there was an entry unknown. At the bottom were 2 very small ink prints of feet. I stepped back and literally fell onto the sofa, where I remained for a long time, staring at the document. I left it on the sofa, stood up and walked over to the stack of envelopes. I took the next envelope, which wasn't sealed either. Inside was a multi-page document, an adoption certificate. I read it several times. Its essence was that a girl named NAA, born to Lydia Sadler, was given up for adoption and all parental rights were revoked. It further stated that since the identity of the birth father was unknown, his permission was not required. Next in the pile were mostly letters from me. I was completely shocked. This had to be the biggest lie in the history of lies. My mind kept coming up with questions. This is not something that can be done overnight, it takes planning, or so I thought. If she thought I would be home for the birth, wasn't she already planning the adoption? Father unknown, if it's not me, then who? It looks like even she didn't know. We were married for 6 years, how many men had she met during this time? Did she know about this? I was sick. I was able to calm down a little and put everything back in its place. I even repacked and taped the box in which all this was stored. As I was sealing the box, I saw the words Lydia's documents and childhood memories written in marker on 4 sides. If I had seen this earlier, I would have no doubt not have opened it. She should have known that even in marriage we need some private thoughts and space. I moved several other boxes and placed this box among them, trying to pretend that I had not seen it. I went out onto the back porch to get some fresh air because I was suffocating inside. What should I do now? How do I even start a conversation? I was lost. There was an absolute void in my head about where to go and how to get there. I needed advice. If I had gone to my parents, they would have exploded and tried to kill Lydia. I was their only child, their only hope. I realized the irony, hope for a grandson. I could have approached her parents, but the prospect did not excite me. We didn't have close friends. Moving frequently and meeting many different people in the military was hard on both families and friendships. I was still on the veranda when Lydia came home. She found me on the street. "Hello dear," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "How much have you done?" "Enough," I answered rather sharply. I had rarely been so short or abrupt when speaking to her, so I felt her eyes on me. She stayed next to me for a few more minutes before going inside. It was probably another hour before I came in. The box with the inscription documents and childhood memories of Lydia had disappeared. We were invited to a welcome meeting on Saturday. "Fine," she said. "The Simpsons from Heidelberg are here too. Do you remember them?" "Not really. He's a major in G2 and I played bridge with her. Jim and Fran are their names." "Oh yes, I remember." She came up to me. "Are you okay? Did something happen? Is there something wrong?" I thought, I bet something is wrong and I intend to find out what it is. "No, I'm probably a little out of my mind today." "Fine. What would you like for dinner, or do you prefer to go to a club?" "I am not hungry. I think I'll go to bed." I did just that, fully dressed on her bed. Just before she joined me, I fell asleep. It must have been late because I was still awake at 1 o'clock in the morning. When I looked at my watch, I realized I had slept until 9 o'clock, which I rarely did. I took a shower and went downstairs. As per our usual routine, she had coffee ready. "Breakfast?" she asked. "No thanks, just coffee." Another rarity, I usually had a full breakfast. She sat down opposite me. "Fine. Is there something wrong? Tell me and maybe I can help." "I just have a lot to think about," I said. I stood up, took my coffee to the sink, poured it out and headed to the garage. "You know I'm here when you need me," she said as I walked away. I drove to the golf course, parked the car and walked to the 19th hole, which was a bar, snack bar and restaurant at the end of the golf course. I ordered 2 eggs over medium and corned beef hash. I even drank the occasional cup of decaf coffee. This used to be my favorite breakfast in my life, until Lydia changed my eating habits. Beef in any form and under any name was strictly prohibited, but I ordered it anyway. I managed to eat most of the food and sat on the deck as the golfers finished on the 18th hole and entered the bar. It was midday when I went home. She had made great progress in emptying out the boxes and making the place her home. I looked around and wondered what it would be like to have a 5-year-old daughter running around. I was still sitting on the toilet when I felt her hand on my back. Suddenly, I hated her. "Get away from me." I almost screamed before throwing my head back and losing more of my breakfast. I hadn't vomited in years, not since I got drunk at my high school prom. When I finished, I went upstairs, rinsed my mouth and brushed my teeth. She was sitting in the living room with a handkerchief in her hand. It looked like she was crying. She looked at me as walked past and headed to the garage. I started to drive the car when she appeared in the rearview mirror. "I can't help you if I don't know what's going on," she said as I continued to move backwards. She saw that I was not going to stop and stepped aside. I went to my unit and into my office. There was no one there except the officer on duty. I sat down at my desk and tried to work, but my heart wasn't in it. It was midnight when I returned home. She was in bed and reading. I undressed, took a shower and announced I'll sleep downstairs, leaving and closing the door behind me. I had just turned on the TV and settled down on the couch when she came in, took the remote control, turned off the TV and stared at me. "Enough of this nonsense. Tell me what's wrong so I can help, or I'll leave." "What will it be?" "I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm not going to put up with you yelling at me when I try help or ducking when you try to run me over." I took the remote control from her hands and turned on the TV again. "Have a nice trip," I said. She left. In less than an hour we'd never talked to each other like that before, and she'd never threatened to leave, let alone do it. I got up and started looking for the box. I found it in the basement under several other boxes. I opened it, took out a small wooden box, made copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers, and returned everything to its place. Since she left, I slept in her bed. On Monday morning, I spoke to my commander and told him my story. I even showed him the documents. He was just as stunned as I was. "I've been on his team for less than a month, so I haven't had time to get used to it yet," he said. He was probably worried that he had a loser on his hands. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "Not sure." "Did she say where she was going when she left?" "No, sir, but she didn't take all her things, especially the box." There was a pause before I spoke again. "I'm thinking about trying to find my daughter if she really is my daughter and starting from there."
It would be almost impossible. "You know confidentiality is very important in adoption cases," he said. "I understand, but I have to do something and start somewhere. I don't trust her to tell me the truth." Then I suddenly stood up. "Oh God, I have an idea. Can I take the day off?" "Certainly." I shook his hand and ran out of his office and building to my car. I returned home, opened the box, took out a wooden box, and dumped its contents on the floor. There was a pacifier. Maida must have used it before she was taken away. I reassembled the box, put the pacifier in a clear plastic bag, and sealed it. I started searching online for a DNA lab somewhere nearby, and found one in downtown Seattle. I went to our bathroom, but all of Lydia's things were gone. I rummaged through the cabinet under the sink, and found an old hairbrush. I put it in another plastic bag along with the bag containing the pacifier, and rushed to Seattle. I gave the technician, whose name was Margie, the pacifier, and she looked at it. It's been a long time, so there may not be any DNA left on it, but we can try, she said. She looked at the hairbrush, pulled out a few hairs, and said there would be no problem with that. Then she asked me to spit in a bottle. We'll call you in about 3 weeks, she said. I returned to Fort Lewis and home. I hadn't heard from Lydia for another day. Hello, I said. Do you feel better? Better than what? Better than you were a couple of days ago. No, same old. Then it's still not safe for me to go home? No, that's not true. Try again in 3 weeks. Why after 3 weeks? By then, I'll have to know if I'm going to kill you or just get a divorce. I hung up the phone. It immediately rang again, but I ignored it. The next day when I returned home, she was there. She met my car when I pulled up to the entrance. She was furious. What do you mean, kill or divorce? Exactly what you said. I think I deserve an explanation. So do I replied. Explanation of what? She asked. We were still standing in the entrance. We didn't shout, but we didn't behave like an army officer and his wife should behave. Are you saying there's nothing you need to explain? I asked. That's exactly what I'm saying. Then there is no hope between us. I emphasized the word hope. What do you mean there is no hope for us? What have I done? Then she understood. Oh God, no, please no. I'll be back in an hour and you shouldn't be here. I'll leave for work in the morning at 6:30 and be back at 5 o'clock. All your stuff should be clear out of this house by then. I left. Exactly an hour later, I returned and she had left. The box and some of her clothes were also missing. She tried to call that evening, but after the first time I blocked her number. The rest of the night passed quietly. I was in the car and opened the garage door at exactly 6:30 the next morning. Lydia appeared in the rearview mirror. I slowly moved backward. The temptation to knock her down was great, but I restrained myself. Can't we at least talk? She said as I continued to move backward. Please. Her hands were on the trunk lid, and she was moving backward with the car. I said nothing. 3 men got out of a van parked on the street and ran up to her, pulling her away from the car. I didn't know whether to be happy or sad about this. The house was almost empty when I returned in the evening. She had taken most of the furniture, including the good silver and china, leaving behind my favorite chair, the guest bedroom set, everyday dishes, and some kitchen utensils. I called the housing authority office the next morning and arranged for government furniture to be temporarily delivered to my apartment. I also contacted the credit union, our securities broker, our insurance company, and everyone else I could think of to handle the everyday household tasks typically associated with a divorce. I then made an appointment with Jack. I knew they had no right to represent me in civil court, but they could give advice. They confirmed what I suspected, she'd get half. We lived in government housing, so we didn't have our own house, but we had enough equity to buy one if we wanted. Both of our cars were paid off. We bought them in Germany for much less than we would have paid for the same cars in the States. I went to my office. My commander talked to me for a while, and told me to take as much reasonable time as I needed to get my head around things, and to keep him informed of my progress or lack thereof. My life continued for a couple more weeks. I went to work, did my chores, mowed my lawn, and waxed my car. Then, one morning, the call came. Hello, I replied. Is this Major Fred Sadler? Yes. Major Sadler, this is Margie from the DNA testing center. A few weeks ago, you brought samples to us for analysis. Yes, that's right. Well, the results are ready, and you can come and look at them. Can't you just tell me now? No, sir. We can either mail them to the address you provide, or show them to you in person. We cannot confirm over the phone that you are who you say you are. We can send the results by mail because, as you remember when you were here, we asked for ID, and were able to confirm your address. I'll be there as soon as possible. I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked for Margie. She came out, and we shook hands. She asked to see my ID. Come with me please, she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait, then left and returned a couple of minutes later. She handed me the pacifier and then spoke. Sample A is yours. Sample B is the hair you brought to us, and Sample C is from a dummy. We were able to determine that samples B and C were positively related. Sample A is not associated with either of them. Thank you, I said as I took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the documentation and left. I got into the car. At least I didn't have a daughter who called another man daddy, but someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day, I started calling them and made 6 appointments. At the 3rd meeting, I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer who hated cheating spouses, whether it was a wife or husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. 45 years of practicing law, and this is absolutely the most diabolical case of selfishness I have ever seen, he said. She should have ice water in her veins instead of blood. It's a pity that the courts here are almost always on the wife's side, regardless of the circumstances of the divorce. I can almost guarantee that they will side with your wife in this case, no matter how it seems. It's as if they feel obligated to punish the husband, no matter how innocent he is. It was late in the afternoon when I returned home. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. Fred. 3 weeks have passed. Lydia.
Brief and clear, the return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. Hello. Fred, she said. I'm not going to discuss this over the phone, and I certainly won't fly to Pennsylvania. So it looks like you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week while I was there. I'll be home at 6:30. Come then. She hung up. I didn't make any special preparations. No drinks, no cheese, no crackers, nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I placed the DNA documents and copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued table. She pulled into the driveway at 6:20, but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I slowly walked to the door, opened it and showed her where to sit. I sat on the couch, and she sat in an uncomfortable straight chair across from me. I took the pacifier out of my pocket and handed it to her. She grabbed it and pressed it to her chest. Thank you, she said, as if I had given her $1 million. I then pushed a copy of the DNA results towards her. You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it. She took the results and held them up with her left hand, the pacifier still pressed to her chest with her right hand. I'm guessing your spec is correct, she asked. I am, I replied. I then pushed the other documents towards her. Without saying a word, she leaned forward, read the title on the top page, and tears gathered in her eyes. She submitted the DNA results and began to read, but the tears flowed more and more and fell on the form, so she put it aside. She looked in her pockets for a handkerchief, but did not find one. Can I have a handkerchief, she asked. I don't have one, I replied, which wasn't entirely true because there was a box of tissues on the end table next to the couch where I was sitting. She saw them and just stared at me. You're not going to help me, are you, she asked. You cheated, I said. She nodded. How many times? Does it matter? No, I just want to know. One weekend with different men. Only with one. Who is he? Again, does it matter? I just want to know. I think I deserve that. I won't tell you. So you'd rather protect him than try to save our marriage? She filed for divorce. Our marriage is over anyway. Why destroy it? Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about our daughter dying at birth. It was a statement, not a question. Yes, I owe you this. She stood up, reached for the box of tissues and placed it in front of her. She took one and wiped her still wet eyes. When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure whose baby it was. I thought about having an abortion, but I couldn't do it. As time passed, I began to convince myself that you still wouldn't know for sure whose child it was. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I became even more confident that you wouldn't find out because fathers and daughters have a special bond, and I was sure you would have the same with her. When it was time to give birth, I started to get nervous. Suddenly you would find out that she was not yours. Then you went on a business trip and I calmed down a little. It was easier for me when you weren't around, but when you said you were coming home, I started to get nervous again. My feelings were like a roller coaster. Maybe you'd find out. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you'd be there for the birth. Maybe you wouldn't. I was on edge. When she was born, she was alive and perfect. They placed her on my chest and when I looked at her I fell in love. She was beautiful with blonde hair and blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. I interrupted. You have dark hair and dark eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair or blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, but you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption. Within 24 hours I had all the documents in my hands. They asked who the father was and I said I didn't know. They said it would make the process easier because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just breastfed her and held her in my arms. She was sucking on this pacifier when they brought the documents for me to sign. At this point she began to cry again. They took her away so I could sign the documents. I signed them and tried to take her back, but the nurse said, "You can't take her away. She is no longer yours." I still tried to reach for her, but I could only grab the pacifier before they left with her. I never saw her again. The 2 photos I was able to take on my phone, this pacifier and her birth certificate, are all I have of her. She was crying now. "God forgive me. I want my daughter back," she said. I sat and watched her cry, not moving, for a long time before I got her a glass of water. "Thank you," she said. I sat down again. It took her a long time to come to her senses. I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up a lie that she died at birth and that her remains were cremated. When you got home, I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate or the death certificate or something else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you. There was no reason for me not to do it, I said. Besides, it was so traumatic that I didn't see the point in adding to our grief by looking at those papers. She continued, "Eventually you and I returned to normal and I was almost happy. But part of me was missing. She's still missing and it gets worse every year. On her birthday, I always found time alone to get her birth certificate and touch her little footprints, and I held that pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but there was some of my dried milk on it, and I wanted to keep it so I didn't. At that moment she wanted to show me this, but it was lost, presumably purified in a DNA laboratory. Oh God, it's gone, she sobbed, then looked at me. Gone. Her milk is gone. Idiot, you took her milk. She dropped her knee.